Let's talk about some spicy neutral eyeshadow palettes. I'm so excited to be finally filming this video. I have 15 palettes to show you. They're going to be in no particular order, but kind of in order because I do have them stacked by size. Of course, I want to shout out Riley, aka Seeking Shifts, for coining the term spicy neutrals when it comes to eyeshadows. I definitely have a lot more palettes to talk about than I thought I was going to. I'm not going to be showing swatches of all of the palettes because that's 15 palettes and I haven't saved my footage of them being swatched. However, I will insert some swatch footage, and some of these I received in PR and some of them I purchased, and that will be marked on the screen. So what are the requirements for these palettes to be mentioned in this video? So first and foremost, I think for me personally, and the way I see spicy neutral eyeshadow palettes specifically, it's all about the color story and the tone. So if it's an all neutral brown color story, are there some more interesting tones that are maybe straying a little bit away from being neutral, or maybe they're more unique kind of tone of brown? Maybe it's a mix of warm and cool, or there are some more unconventional pops of color. That is what really makes it interesting. And then of course the shimmers. I would say layerability. Are they multi-chromes? Are they duochromes? Are they dimensional? Is there something just really special about them? They're not just like a typical neutral uniform shimmer shadow. They have a little bit of extra something, whether that is the shift or the sparkle. It doesn't have to always be shifty or dimensional, but the shimmer shadow will amp up the look. So that's the criteria I used to pick out these palettes. So let's jump right into it because there's 15 palettes. So first up, this is the smallest palette in the bunch, and it is the Elegant Eyes little 6-pan palette from Glam Cosmetics. This is really fancy packaging for Glam Cosmetics. So these are warmer neutrals, and the thing that really makes it spicy in here are the shimmers. Like for sure the shimmers. They're just so beautiful, specifically elegant and cultivated. They are so ultra sparkly and glistening. And this shade right here is a little bit more of a sheer type of shade, so you can layer it. Sumptuous is a multi-chrome, so that definitely makes it a little bit more spicy. It's a rosy pink shifting to gold to green on a really harsh angle, so it will make any look interesting. The next palette is the Dragon Eye palette from What's Up Beauty, and this one, I mean, it's definitely leaning very neutral, but the shimmers is what really takes it out of that just standard neutral territory. So you have a brighter green, you also have a more neutral shifty shade, and some of these are a little bit more topper like, but some of them can be built up. So that is definitely something that makes it a little bit more interesting. And of course, we do have these tones out here, so I feel like if we kind of removed these two shades, it would be much more neutral, but because of these two, it just kind of allows you to get out of the fully neutral territory. And of course, we have the shimmer shades to pair with the mattes and just really amp it up because they are very punchy shimmers. The texture is just really beautiful. They're very shiny but refined and sparkly. I think there's one true multi-chrome in here, and I believe it's this one right here, and it seems like it's a little bit more of a jeweled kind of shade, but it does have a little bit of vibrancy. It can be a little bit more opaque, or you can wear them a little bit more sheer, and that is something that I very much appreciate with palettes that are neutral. Can I embellish the neutral matte? The more shiny, maybe slightly colorful kind of shimmer shadows. I think in general, What's Up Beauty does a really great job of doing neutral color stories that have just like a little bit of stepping out and a little bit more fun, but not fully pushing it to being more of like a colorful kind of color story. So then moving on to the Morally Gray palette from Bella Beaute Bar. This is a predominantly cool tone palette, and this one, it's really the shimmers in here. I think the mattes are a little bit more expected, but the shimmers are really what makes this a spicy neutral palette. The shade Indecisive, so dimensional. It has a bunch of different colorful sparkles throughout it. Is a little bit more on the sheer side. Then we have a more truly opaque, fully metallic shimmer that has a lot of sparkle at the top, the complex motivations, and then an iridescent, which I always love to see an iridescent in every palette. I feel like for me personally, it is a staple, and the hollow does make it extra spicy. So it's not just a black shimmer shadow, it has a little bit of extra surprise in there. And then next, moving on to the Fighter palette from Fantasy Cosmetica. I really like the tones in this one. I love lighter mustard matte and a gray, which I feel like these are together just a little bit more unexpected. And the shimmers also bridge in between being cooler and warmer, so you can kind of create a pretty decent variety of looks, especially because of the shimmers, because you have the different tones, and then Glory being a really beautiful, more topper like super shiny shade. It will really layer nicely with any of the matte tones in here. So then moving on to, this is another 9-pan palette, and this is the Warlock of the Wood palette, which was a curated color story by Lee, and this is from Dieverune Cosmetics. And I just love the two pastel tones in here. The Periwinkle, it's a pastel teal, and I feel feel like they really add just a little bit of interest into this color story. So you can go like fully neutral here with the center row, or you can kind of like spice it up a little bit and maybe pop Wolfsbane or Decay in the crease and then deepen it out with Familiar. And then there's a split pan iridescent and then a really dimensional, super sparkly neutral shimmer shadow. This is just such a perfect neutral everyday kind of shade, one and done as well. And then a pop of a forest green. It's got a little bit of silveriness to it, and it is a multi-chrome, and it just really is a special shade. It's ultra metallic. It is such a beautiful, super metallic, shiny shade. Like if coins had a green shift to it. This next palette came to mind almost immediately when I started to pull all the palettes together, and I knew I had to, of course, mention this one. This is such a beautiful palette. I love this one so much. And this is the Sorceress Smoke palette from Unearthly Cosmetics, and everything about this is so beautiful. It is leaning into fall a little bit with some of the more grungy olive tone shades and the oranges here. And then this kind of more salmon shade is really interesting. I think that it adds a lot to this color story overall. And then of course we have a really nice variety of some neutral shimmers, but also a sheer shade that flashes green, and then a smoky purple. And then these two shades have a bunch of different sparkles throughout them. So they're ultra beautiful. They are very piecey. They don't accentuate any sort of skin texture, and they are just so dimensional and really fun to pair with all the different tones of mattes in here. I also feel like it's a really nice balance of shimmers to mattes. The next palette is the Cool Neutrals palette from Sigma Beauty. I don't think this name really matches the inside color story, but that aside, I love this color story. This was kind of my second palette, my reintroduction into Sigma. I have tried them previously. I didn't really I want to say years ago at this point, and I wasn't the biggest fan of the mattes and the shimmers, and especially now, the types of shimmers I gravitate towards, they just weren't my preference, but they have amped them up a little bit, but they have also kept some that are a little bit more of a true shimmer in between a metallic, as well as some true satin. So you get a nice variety, which I think is very important for a general customer base. So I think Burst and Brazil are a little bit more of like a standard shimmer, and then Polished is really where they kind of punch it up a little bit. It's a little bit extra sparkly, and the mattes are really pigmented, and I love all the tones in here. I feel like it's an interesting color story because you have cooler tones, you have some more neutral tones almost, and then some warmer tones. So I feel like overall this palette gives you a really nice variety for being a neutral palette. I think that's what really makes this palette spicy, just the mixture of the tones in here, and then some of the shimmers being a little bit amped up as well. The next palette really tests the threshold of a spicy neutral palette, because I think this is not neutral for a lot of people, but for me, I think this is a spicy neutral palette, and that is the Jewels and Gem palette from Oden's Eye. I love this color story so much. The tones in here are something else. It's really unconventional color story. And again, you have a really nice mixture of some shimmers that will like kind of amp up the look a little bit, that are not really too neutral. I would say none of these shimmers are really truly neutral. I think High is more of a duochrome, and so is Rhapsody, which Rhapsody really impressed me. Whatever this shimmer formula is, I was really hoping that after this palette, the future palettes would have shimmers with this formula. Unfortunately, that's not the case. So I'm not sure how come only this palette has it, but whatever is happening here, it is beautiful. So the shimmers in here really just add a little bit of extra oomph. To this day, this is my favorite color story from Oden's Eye. There's just something about this one. It's really special. The next palette is the Flying Fiddles palette from Adept Cosmetics. And I mean, this one also is definitely bridging like a little bit extra spicy, because we have a teal, we have a burgundy. So the combination of the two might not really feel too neutral color story. And then the soft lime green, and of course the marble shade, which kind of just ends up looking neutral. And then this darker green shimmer shade, I just feel like it does really just push it out of the fully neutral color story. And then the shimmers have a really nice variety of being a little bit more topper-like, and some having just a little bit of extra sparkles throughout it that make them really dimensional, like this shade. And then we have a multi-chrome Dahlia. I think this Green Kelly matte shade is a really great choice in here. And the shimmers are a beautiful PC texture, so they feel very elegant with having a little bit of extra oomph. And then the mattes complementing it, but also pushing it a little bit more out of the box. I do have two more Adept palettes to talk about, so let's get into those. The next one is the Minka Remastered. This one has the newer upgraded kind of packaging, a little bit Natasha Denona style, and this one, Oh my god, the shimmers, they're so stunning. There's some more like chunky shades like Ava and Maya, but there's also a Hollow, Linda, and then Anna is such an interesting grungy shade. It's smoky green with pink, so it really makes it super, super interesting. And then we do have 2 purples in here. So basically the purples are really what kind of pushes it out of the box. Just like in the Flying Fiddles palette, it was the Kelly Green shade. I feel like in this one we have the plum shade and the more vibrant, but still kind of pastel purple shade. But then we have Ariana to ground the entire color story. So I just really, really love the variety of the colors in here and the shimmers. I think it's a really versatile palette and you can create so many different looks. The third Adept palette, you could have probably guessed this one, is the Unity palette. And this one, I mean, we have like a little bit more of a vibrant magenta with a burgundy and then a mossy green, but the shimmers are leaning mostly very neutral besides like these 2 really, but they're like an exquisite kind of neutral. They have a little bit of extra spice to them. They have a little bit of duochrome, or they have a little bit of extra dimensionality. They have different color flecks throughout them. For example, Tranquility is a little bit more taupey, but it has blue sparkles throughout it, and it just makes it a little bit extra exciting. The shimmers are really the star of the show, I think, in this palette, and they are really what like brings the entire color story together. 4 more palettes to talk about, and I had to mention the All Done Up palette from Blend Bunny Cosmetics. This is one of my favorite color stories from Blend Bunny because it is so well balanced and the tones are just so interesting. And I love that the mattes go from light to dark, and it's just really easy to use. You can do a look with each of the columns, or you can kind of mix in between. It's very straightforward, but it can also give you quite a bit of variety if that's what you're looking for on that set day. I also think this palette has some of the best shimmers that Blend Bunny has ever done. They're very piecey and sparkly. They have a really small particle size. They feel silky smooth, and some of them can be definitely built up a little bit if you use a tacky primer. The shimmers are just so stunning in here. So like all the things together just work really nicely. The next palette is a little bit similar to the All Done Up palette in the way that the concept is laid out. So it's lighter mattes to darker mattes, and some of the tones are maybe just a tad bit similar, and I did talk about this in my video on this palette, and that is the Barely Basic palette from Glam Cosmetics. If I was to create a neutral palette, this would be pretty much it. I love that we have some iridescent shimmers in here, but then we also have a row of more opaque shades, and together that is just the like top tier combination. And then we have the different tones and we have the different depth levels. So all of this together gives you so much variety, and it makes it very easy to use, very intuitive. This palette is so beautiful, and the shimmers are so stunning. They're a very, very ethereal kind of piecey formula. They just have that sparkle and that shine, and it just really levels up any look. The next palette is the Cosmic Beauty Neutrals palette, and this one has just a couple of different kind of interesting tones thrown in here, like the eggplant and then the cooler tone matte, but also we have a mustard and then a super kind of washed out mossy green. I feel like those kind of tones together are really interesting, as well as with the burgundy palette are really what make it interesting, I think, because we have Glamorous, which is a really beautiful neutral shimmer shadow with silvery flecks throughout it, and then Desire is a multichrome. It's a really punchy reddish orange, and it does shift all the way to a lime green at a really harsh angle with the light hitting it, so it is fully a true multichrome. And then another shifty shade is this Iridescent up here, super punchy as well, kind of flashing orangey red, and then a duochrome, which this is a beautiful slight brown base, kind of flashing green type of shade. These kinds of shades just always spice up any look. It is kind of like a staple shadow. And then the last palette is also the largest palette that I'm going to be talking about, and that is the Smoky Glam palette from Bella Beaute Bar. You have just about everything you could possibly need when it comes to all these kind of adjacent shades. So we're going from sagey greens to kind of grays to plums and mauves to pinks. I think the only thing that's really missing in here are maybe like warmer tone browns. As for the shimmers, you have some really beautiful standard but pretty foiled shimmer shades down here, but then you also have some little bit more interesting shades, like especially Imagine, which is a beautiful, super punchy, really vibrant, almost glowy blue pink purple, which is going to look amazing layered over especially like some of these tones over here. And then this magenta shade has blue flecks throughout it, and then Playful is also a little bit more shifty, so it just adds a little bit more interest, and it's very punchy. It has such a variety of especially the matte tones, and that's for me what makes it really a little bit more on the spicy side. So those are the 15 spicy neutral palettes I have in my collection. I'm curious to hear what your spicy neutral palettes are down in the comments, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you next time.